Republican senator not up for re-election this year is facing outrage over comments that critics call overtly racist. We're talking about Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville, who used to be head football coach at Auburn University. Now, here is what he said about Democrats at a rally in Nevada with former President Trump.
They're not soft on crime, they're pro-crime. They want crime. They want crime because they want to take over what you got. They want to control what you have. They want reparation because they think the people that do the crime are owed that. They're not owed that.
Now, you heard the word reparations there. The NAACP defines it as financial recompensation for African Americans whose ancestors were slaves. Tuberville seemed to be saying that blacks are, quote, the people that do the crime. Now, the Democratic Party does not support reparations, though President Biden has supported studying the issue.
All right. Before I get into the random thoughts, the RT, I would like to address the word reparations. Now, I'm reading from an article by Dylan Matthews, and it was dated May 23rd, 2014. It says 6 times victims have received reparations, including 4 in America. Okay? 6 times. Now, I'm making an emphasis of this because I would say the original time, the first time reparations were mentioned, or at least the version of it, was after the freedom of the slaves, or during that period when President Lincoln had promised black people that there would be 40 acres and a mule in terms of reparations. But that was dismantled, taken away, because once he put that thought out, or that suggestion, or saying that he was going to do this, that's when his life was ended. That's when he was assassinated. And in turn, his own vice president did not follow up on that. As a matter of fact, his own vice president was against it. But let me read you this. 6 times. And let's see, 6 times the Holocaust. The closest analog to reparations for slavery and Jim Crow is probably the reparations that West Germany agreed to pay after the Holocaust. A major component was the $7 billion in 2014 dollars West Germany agreed to give to the then young state of Israel. Let's see. It says Menachem Begin, then the leader of Israel's conservative opposition and later its first right-of-center prime minister, opposed the deal on the grounds that it appeared to forgive Germany in exchange for money. But the deal eventually went through, and the consequences for Israel's well-being were astounding. And let's see, but that was actually a tiny fraction of Germany's total reparations payment, which totaled nearly $89 billion as of 2012, and largely went to individual survivors. The terms of the reparations, most of which are negotiated by the Conference on Jewish Material Claims against Germany, are constantly evolving, and some payments made on a one-time basis and others as monthly pensions of varying amounts. Okay, I'm going to the next one, apartheid. One of the duties of South Africa's post-apartheid Truth and Reconciliation Commission, besides investigating human rights abuses committed by the apartheid government, was recommending reparations and other policies to redress those abuses and aid victims of the former regime. The commission recommended about $360 million in reparations to be distributed in 6 annual payments to victims identified by the commission. But in 2003, President Thabo Mbeki announced in 2003 that he would authorize only $85 billion to be given in a one-time payments of $3,900, which above the average annual salary in the country at that time. The recipients numbered 16,397 as of 2012, a tiny fraction of the actual number of people victimized by the regime. Okay, let's go to the next one. Japanese internment. The forced internment of 120,000 Japanese Americans in camps during World War II resulted in about $3.1 billion in property loss and $6.4 billion in income loss in 2014 dollars. If you account for the possibility that that money might have been invested and gotten above inflation returns, the economic losses are even larger. Congress made 2 attempts at reparations: the Japanese American Claims Act of 1948 and the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. Between 1948 and 1965, the former authorized payments totaling $38 million, which comes to somewhere between $286 to $374 million in 2014 dollars, which didn't come close to matching the economic loss. The latter offered survivors $20,000 each in reparations, and by 1998, 80,000 survivors had collected their share for a total payment of $1.6 billion, between $2.3 billion and $3.2 billion today, in today's money. There is no accounting by which either measure adequately repay internees for their economic losses, let alone compensated for pain and suffering. All right, next one. Forced sterilization. Most Americans states practice one or another form of eugenics during the 20th century, with forced sterilizations of unfit people being a prime instrument. The targets were largely, but by no means entirely, mentally or developmentally disabled. Poor Black women on welfare were especially likely to be victimized in this manner. The Supreme Court gave the practice a green light with 1927's Buck versus Bell, and eventually 33 states adopted the practice, forcibly sterilizing about 65,000 people total throughout the 1970s. Oregon forcibly sterilized people as late as 1981. And its Board of Eugenics, renamed the Board of Social Protection in 1967, was only abolished in 1983. 1983, that's when my oldest son was born. Very few states have acknowledged or apologized for these policies. Not surprised. And only one, North Carolina, has set up a reparations program. The state sterilized about 7,600 people, most of whom are no longer living, but last year passed a $10 million reparations program that should give the more than 177 living victims somewhere in the range of $50,000 each. The payments should be made within a few years, and some victims have objected, saying this doesn't come close to remedying the injustice, as one victim, Elaine Riddick Jesse, who was sterilized at the age of 14 after being raped and given the resulting son up for adoption. Put it this way, if I accepted it, what kind of value am I putting on my life? California, which sterilized by far the largest number of people of any state, has yet to pay out reparations. Next, the Tuskegee experiment. After the end of the Tuskegee experiment, in which 399 black men with syphilis were left untreated to study the progression of the disease between 1932 and 1972, the government reached a $10 million out-of-court settlement with the victims and their families in 1974, which included both monetary reparations in 2014 dollars, $878,000 for men in the study who had syphilis, $72,000 for heirs, $77,000 for those in the control group, and $24,000 for heirs of those in the control group, and a promise of lifelong medical treatment for both participants and their immediate families. According to the CDC, 15 descendants are still receiving treatment through the program today. And lastly, Rosewood. In 1923, the primarily black town of Rosewood on the Gulf Coast of Florida was destroyed in a race riot. That, by official counts, killed at least 6 black residents and 2 whites, though some descendants of the town's residents have claimed many more were killed and dumped in mass graves, which I can believe that. In 1994, the state of Florida agreed to a reparations package worth around $3.36 million in 2014 dollars, of which $2.4 million today would be set aside to compensate the 11 or so remaining survivors of the incident. $800,000 to compensate those who were forced to flee the town, and $160,000 will go to college scholarships primarily aimed at descendants. So those are your reparations, and not just talking in the United States, but worldwide. Again, we as a people were promised through hundreds of years of slavery, well, 300-400 years of slavery, some sort of reparations. 40 acres, land, and a mule, transportation. We got neither. And as a matter of fact, I would like to add to that, whereas when immigration was in its infancy in America, and you had many to come over from, you had the Irish, Europeans, and many more, they were not, well, especially with the Irish and Jews and so forth, and many others that I can't name right now, but obviously, were placed in ghettos. You can look it up as history. They were placed in ghettos, and they had a really rough time, and it produced gangs, which was the genesis for the movie Gangs of New York. These gangs were pretty much flooding New York because they had a hard time with the language. They lived in poverty, and basically the city, the state, the government itself wanted to keep them in one place. But then it came a point, and I'm just paraphrasing this and trying to move things along, but then it came a point whereas white Americans had the bright idea of, we see how their population is growing, the immigrants, let's put them in the status of white people. And when they did that, they gave them They gave them a form of reparations. They gave them property. They gave them startup businesses, so to speak, within their communities. So that gave them a foothold into not being in gangs anymore and to live a quality life. Look it up. Look it up. Whereas black people, because we were so easy to be identified because of skin color, we were still left to pick from the rubble, so to speak. Even when black soldiers came back from World War II, they were still looked down upon. They were still spit upon. They were still disrespected. Disrespected. And they were even cheated with the GI Bill. Yes, look that up too. They were cheated with the GI Bill. So it's been a struggle. Now things are a lot better now. Okay, don't get me wrong on that. A lot of things have turned around, but there are still situations, just like this situation with Tommy Tuberville. All we want is what was promised. But let me continue on with the rest of RT. Tommy Tuberville, former Auburn University head coach, regarding his comments, some would say, how could he be racist when all of those years of coaching so many young black men on mostly black teams, how can he be racist? Well, I would say this: a person can still be racist, especially when a particular situation will garner them money and fame or of some sort of personal pleasure. For instance, there are many white men who took advantage of black women sexually during the slave era, but still had a hatred towards black people. And here's another example. As long as you're making me money, like the former owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, who made racist statements and had a black girlfriend, or to the most recent Phoenix Suns owner, who was caught also making racist comments, for which the racist can give the appearance of liking you, but there is still that hate. Enough said.